1. Me and my husband are quite in shock after experiencing something really weird yesterday. Background. Around 1 year ago, March 2023, during our travels to Vegas, we went to a taco spot called Tacos El Gordo. There was a long line, and while in line, the guy in the back of us started making conversation. They were a very high-spirited guy with braces that explained he was staying at a hotel nearby, and had come the previous night with his wife and kids to get some tacos. They really liked the tacos, so they had to come back. He shared that they'd flown in from the Pacific Northwest, a bit about his job and his wife's. His wife and children eventually joined him, hangs out for a bit in line with him, then they head back out to find a seat. We share a bit about ourselves, do some more small talk. We finally get to the front of the line, order our food, and say our goodbyes and nice to meet yous. That's it, never see them again. Totally forget about this incident. Present day, 1 year later, March 2024, we took a weekend trip to San Diego. I've never been there, so we wanted to check it out. Context. I want to add some context to this day, because I think it's important to note all the things that had to happen and change for the event to have happened. First of all, out of all weekends, it decided to downpour in San Diego this weekend, so we had to readjust our plans. We planned to do those trolley hop-on, hop-off rides to the main sightseeing locations in San Diego. Unfortunately, because it was raining so badly, the trolley decided to limit the number of shuttles that passed by, leaving us stranded in the first location we hopped off. We came up with Plan B, which was to make our way to museums in Balboa Park, to wait for the rain to stop, and then head to a few other neighborhoods once we got some clear skies. Once we got through all that, we headed back towards the neighborhood we were staying at, tried out a bar, we weren't feeling the vibe, walked for a bit, and finally decided to head to where the event occurred. The event. My husband suggested that we should go to a taco spot I'd pinned on Google, called Tacos El Gordo. We weren't too hungry, but we might as well taste it because it had great reviews. There's a huge line, and as we're waiting in line, we realize that this is actually the same Tacos El Gordo as the one in Las Vegas we'd gone the year before. Cool, didn't know they had a chain. We start talking about how we'll compare which location was better. There is this couple in front of us, and right in front of them, we notice this guy start chatting them up. We overheard him making small talk, asking them what they did for a living, etc. I briefly catch a glimpse of this guy, and mention to my husband, "Hey, doesn't that look like that one guy we saw in Vegas last year?" That would be funny if it was him, wouldn't it? Then we stared more carefully. He doesn't have the braces anymore, but that definitely looks like him. We remembered that he had his wife and kids, so we tell ourselves, if we see them, we know for sure it's him. 1 minute later, we see them. Holy crap. Our faces go white, and we're stunned. To triple confirm, my husband actually goes up to the guy and asked him, "This might sound weird, but did you happen to be in Vegas last year and also went to Tacos El Gordo while there?" The guy confirmed that he had been. He said his family flew in for spring break this year to San Diego, were walking around and happened to notice that this was the same taco spot they went to while in Vegas, so they decided to stop at that moment. He actually did not remember our conversation in Vegas, but he kinda laughed and thought it was also a weird coincidence. We again made some small talk while in line, got our tacos, and went our separate ways. What the hell? This was not just coincidence. This doesn't happen, ever. What is the probability that we'd both end up in the same city 1 year later at the same restaurant, same weekend, same time, only 2 feet away? Not to mention that our whole day wasn't supposed to go this way. It could have gone completely differently, and yet somehow every single decision we made up to this moment led us to the same spot. We actually weren't supposed to go to San Diego on this particular weekend. I had originally booked it for 2 weeks prior, but we realized we had plans, so rebooked everything all over again. How does this happen? P.S. to the kind stranger we met, see you next year in whichever city we decide to make a trip to next March. 2. This happened to me years ago and messed with my mind. None of it made sense. I was working for a company where I did deliveries. We had clients that were mostly in the city I worked in, with a few that were a few hours' drive from the shop. One drive in particular was a 200-mile drive one way. They were our largest account for a long time, and it more than paid off for the time and fuel used to get up there and back. This was a trip that I did all in one day, so 400-mile round trip. This may seem like useless detail to put here, but it will provide context for the rest of the story. The first few times running this delivery was pretty daunting. It was a full-day event. 3 to 4 hours up and the same time back, depending on traffic, weather, and other circumstances. It got easier after doing it twice a month for a few months. My body acclimated to it, and it became a drive I enjoyed doing. The company I worked for was tiny, family-owned and run. Excellent people to work for. They treated their employees as if they were extended family. The most enjoyable part of it was not having anyone around you, needing to do things or breathing down your neck. A good 85% of the drive was on an interstate, I-94 to be exact. By the time this experience happened, I had done this drive hundreds of times. I knew the drive and the route very well. I could drive it blindfolded, as the saying goes. One time I was driving this route. A beautiful summer day, bright blue sky, comfortably warm. The traffic was flowing well. By this point, I had already been on the interstate for an hour or so. Anyone who has driven interstates for any distance knows that there are parts of interstates where exits on and off ramps become pretty sparse with miles in between them. Around this time, I passed an on-ramp onto the interstate I was traveling on. At the time, nothing seemed amiss. I looked in my rear-view mirror and noticed a car coming up on the on-ramp and merging behind me. Nothing unusual about that, happens pretty often. Just your usual run-of-the-mill car, probably something like a Toyota Camry that has a dime a dozen, with your average Joe behind the wheel. This is where things become weird. A few minutes later, I look in my rear view again, and that car is no longer there. I looked to my left side to see if he was in the passing lane to get around me, but he wasn't there either. Nor was he in front of me, like he had made the pass without me noticing it. Some might think, well, maybe he got off at the next exit without you noticing it. The thing is, that wasn't possible. This was a stretch of the interstate where entrance ramps and the next exit ramp were miles apart. Not just a few miles, but 15 to 20 miles apart. As to be expected, as this part of the interstate went through the middle of nowhere. It didn't pass through or near any cities or towns for there to be exit ramps to get to. And there were no rest stops or waysides that he could have pulled off into either. The car just up and disappeared. While I was thinking about what had happened and where he could have disappeared, I started to notice that something else was off as well. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, just a sense of unease about something that I couldn't articulate to myself. That's when I noticed that the sky had turned a solid, dull gray. Not an overcast gray, where there would be clouds or smoke in the air. It was just gray. Like something else had replaced the sky and the scenery was drab. And that wasn't the only thing. I only noticed that there were no traffic for miles, not in front of me, not in back, not even on the other side of the interstate. Sure, this would happen from time to time, especially during times when traffic was light, but that would only last a few minutes at a time at most. This felt like it went on for hours. It was quite unnerving, as I had no idea what was going on. I'm a person who is usually a very rational, critical thinker. But there didn't seem to be anything rational about this. After what seemed like an eternity, but was only likely a few minutes, I suddenly had what I could only describe as feeling like I had blacked out for a split second. If anyone else has experienced this, you know what I'm talking about. It's like suddenly coming to again, or being thrust back into your reality, where your whole body jumps or lurches, and you shake your head to rid yourself of the feeling. After that momentary lapse in consciousness, everything was back to normal. The sky, the traffic, everything. As if nothing ever happened. And I also noticed that I was about an hour closer to my stop. I got off the next exit and pulled into a convenience store parking lot to gather myself and let my nerves calm, all the while playing the events back in my head, trying to decide what happened. After my mind and body calmed down, I went into the store, used the facilities, got back into the vehicle, and continued the drive. The rest of the day went normally, and that never happened to me again. If anyone has any ideas on what the heck happened, I'd be interested in hearing it. 3. In early 2019, I was a junior in college and I lost my phone. I lived in a house with 4 other roommates, and we decided to go play basketball at a nearby park. I was leaving my room and checked the time when lo and behold my phone died. Well, I thought no point in bringing this along. That's the last thing I can remember. I imagined I would have flung it toward my bed, but I have no recollection of doing anything. I remember clearly watching it die, then blank. Normally I would think, how odd I can't remember what I did with my phone. But this is not the glitch. We play basketball and shoot the breeze, and get back, and eventually I go to bed. I wake up and cannot find my phone. I think, this happens, it'll turn up. It does not. I start to get worried as 2 and 3 days pass with no sign. I do the classic walking around, even in all the stupid impossible places, but turn up nothing. My friends try to tell me, did you bring it when we played basketball? And I thought, hell no. I was wearing sweatpants, and wouldn't want a dead phone weighing my bum down. I eventually searched my room so many times that I went full psycho mode, pulled every piece of furniture out, mattress, bookshelf, desk, everything but the clothes in my closet, until eventually I rifled through them too and found no phone. People looked at me like I was nuts, but I was sure my phone couldn't have left the room. Why would I have watched the battery die and thought, let me take this with me, might need it while I'm balling out? But maybe I was an idiot and did bring an uncharged phone to the park, and left it there by accident. I go to check, and sure enough, no sight of it. I tried to tell people my phone quite literally disappeared, but they wouldn't seem to think it strange. My roommates told me it was probably picked up by somebody near the courts. Stuff goes missing all the time, right? I pulled my room apart twice more in the same manner, total complete upheaval, nowhere to hide, before I eventually caved into the notion that I had simply mistaken something. The phone was gone. This is not the glitch. Cut to a year later, June 2020, it was graduation, last day before moving out. COVID was happening, so my friends and I got our families together for a cookout in the backyard instead of a commencement ceremony. Afterwards, we planned to go skydiving outside the city. My room was mostly stripped clean except for the mattress. My parents offered to sell that and dump the rest of my stuff on the curb while I left to go jump out of a plane. So I went skydiving with all my roommates and got dropped off back home. No one is home except for one of my roommates, his mom and dad and me. The other parents are in their hotels, and the other roommates are with their parents. The 4 of us grill some leftovers, eat, and eventually I excuse myself to triple-check that everything looks good inside. I go down to my room to check if my parents followed through on clearing out the mattress. The door was open, and I found that every last bit of stuff had been finally packed or sold off, except for 2 things. First, a bundle of white coat hangers in the closet. Second, my missing phone. The same case, same make and model as the one that disappeared over a year before. I even kept a little fortune from a Chinese cookie inside the case. It was definitely the same, lying on its side with its screen facing the wall, in the corner where I used to sleep. It took me several texts between my parents and I to convince me that a glitch had occurred. Had they found it when they cleared the stuff out and left it there for me to find? No. They were as shocked as I was when I told them I found it. The last thing they pulled out of my room was the mattress. They had even done a final walkthrough to look for any junk or trash or spare items I had neglected to pack. There was nothing. They said the room was empty. They looked, when everything was gone, and did not see my phone, just as I had looked all those times, wondering where the hell it could be hiding. The phone itself appeared undamaged, but wouldn't turn on. Instead, when I held the power button, it would buzz oddly, in little spurts, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, always with a pause in between, sometimes long, sometimes short. I could hold the power button again, and it would stop, and when I tried to turn it on, the buzz would start again. This went on for days, but eventually the vibration got weaker and stopped. I sat on the floor of my basement. My neighbor came over to say goodbye, and I was really feeling nutso. Everyone was kind of blasé about it, like, oh, that's weird. And I'm full Pepe Silva mode. Eventually the screen did turn on, but had an error message in red text on a black screen. I wrote it down, but you wouldn't believe what it said. To summarize, there was something about a hard drive partition error. I googled the exact message, couldn't get any matches at all, nothing even close. I always meant to take it in and get a tech support person to check it out, even well after the text went away and the buzzing stopped, but never did. I still have the phone, though. Want to do a little critical thinking brainstorm? Here are the only rational explanations. 1, my parents both lied. My loving, thoughtful, helpful parents, who can't take the same stance on pretty much anything, decided to neglect their parental duties to gaslight me. Even in this scenario, which is absurd, my parents were there to support me and acted as such. That doesn't explain why I didn't find it when I first looked, and looked, and looked. Obviously, the phone didn't get lost in the park, so it had to have been in my room when I was looking for it over and over again. But wasn't in there behind the mattress when I pulled everything out of the room. 2. My parents didn't see the black phone on the white carpet in the empty room when they did their last look after removing the mattress. This is absurd. My parents are not disabled. Anybody who's ever moved or even stayed in a hotel and done it once over knows you can always spot something standing out, especially if there's nothing else to look at. I saw it immediately. How could anyone in a blank room looking for anything loose or valuable not see a cell phone on the floor? That's it. That's the literal and figurative glitch, and the only rational explanations are completely ridiculous. So I assumed my phone fell through a wormhole. Honestly, if anyone has any ideas, I'd be happy to hear them, rational or otherwise. There's plenty of details I hyperfixated on for a while, things I didn't want to include here because I'm not sure they're significant enough. I started to feel like an obsessive spiral after a while, so I slowed down and stopped thinking about it. At the end of the day, this thing happened to me and I can't even explain it. I've lost stuff before and I always find it. Or figure out some obvious place I must have left it, but finding it like this, in the most impossible way, I just can't explain. Anyway, hopefully you can all appreciate the strangeness of it fully. 'Cause no one else I've told the story to seems to get it. They just say, well, that's crazy, and move on. But I guess that's all you can really do. 5. My story of gained time. I've also gained time before, like some other stories I've read. I lived in Pennsylvania at the time, and was at a celebration party in New York. I left to drive home, and had 8 others in the van, in-laws of ages ranging from about 8 years to 50 years at the time. I had no clue how to actually get back home to Pennsylvania, but was designated driver and figured I'd simply look at signs and figure it out. Over 30 years ago and before GPS was easily available. We left New York at just before 1 a.m., just as it was also getting rainy and misty out, so I wasn't happy about how things were starting. Knowing where I had to go, it would be at least 3 hours, since it took that long for my brother-in-law to get us to the area, and another relative's house, before even going to the event, another 30-minute drive further. I wasn't impaired in any way. I was a little tired but not sleepy, and had a vehicle full of little kids and grandparents, so was on even higher awareness, since I never drove between these areas before. 3 of the other adults, my wife included, plus one of the younger kids, said they'd all stay awake with me, as I drove to keep me company, so as others fell asleep, the awake 3 were all just talking about the night's party. All of a sudden, I see this bright light behind me like an 18-wheeler was coming up fast and had its high beams on. Double-checking around me for clear areas to move into, I notice no other cars now, and all I can think is to get over and let this truck cruise past as far and as fast as they want. So I got over to the far right lane and slowed a bit myself, and then felt the van I was in more or less just rock and rumble like a train was passing us and vibrating the van. I now pulled off to the side of the road because something just felt off to me. No truck passed, but the light was gone. No actual sounds of other traffic of any kind, and open fields on both sides of the highway. And no train, or even train tracks. So I said to the others, "Did anyone see what that was?" And I looked, and everyone was sound asleep. But I'd swear, some were still talking when I first noticed that light behind us. At that point I'm confused, but figure I'll just get back on the road and get home. Very next exit is where I need to get off, and I take it, and pull into the in-laws' driveway and park. Everyone starts waking up and shuffling inside. And my wife says, "It's late, so let's stay here, grab a couch." I make sure the van is empty and locked. I lock up the house and head for the couch, but stop for a glass of water while looking at the clock. It shows 2:17 a.m. Somehow, I made an almost 3.5-hour drive that I've never driven before and without proper directions, and also in a misty, light rain in less than half the time, only using a signage exit, when there should have been at least 3 major turn-off roads to get between the places we were at and going to, and it should have taken me even longer than usual since the rain was slowing my travel too. Nobody else remembers the time we got home, as they just went back to sleep. Each one said they felt really exhausted, and after lots of questions, which they all thought was funny and weird I was even asking. All anyone remembers is getting into the van for the ride home. A couple remembered talking a bit as we drove, and then not a single memory beyond being at the house and going back to sleep there. Nobody else saw a bright light. Nobody else felt that odd rumble of the van as I sat on the side of the highway. Not a single memory of the time at all, besides appropriate times when we left New York to head back to Pennsylvania. All who could remember times said that it was definitely just before or just after 1 a.m., depending on who was asked. All I know is the ride should have gotten us back at about 4 a.m. at the earliest, and I have no explanation at all for the light speeding, and I mean the bright light came out of nowhere behind me super bright and speeding really fast, up to us, and then disappearing and all without sight or sound of any other vehicle, but somehow causing enough vibration and shock to the area that the entire van was rocking like I was parked directly next to a train passing. So does anyone think I passed through a wormhole, or more accurately, a wormhole passed the area and carried us with it for a bit, before expelling us near our actual exit, and all of that by chance that we got dropped at the exact exit I needed to get off at, and also within less than half the normal travel time between 2 points. I checked the fuel on the van and mileage. Back then we used to write down mileage when we filled up on long trips to see what mileage we were getting compared to local driving. The fuel and mileage both showed up only about 1/4 to half of what was written beginning the trip there. I didn't keep the actual notes, but at the time, I figured with a little driving in that area before going to the party, we would use some fuel and add some mileage, of course, and we topped off fuel again before getting to the party around the corner, so was full as soon as I drove home from the party. I also didn't need to stop at all for gas on the way home, but again, the next day upon checking the van, it was just under 3/4 of a tank of fuel left. Besides the wormhole theory of just moving us through time and space, I sometimes also think of the possibility that what if there was a dimension, reality, timeline, etc., where there was some horrible accident that happened involving me as one of us, so we were shifted to allow our survival for whatever reason. Just weird. 5. My nephew, by marriage, was 10 years old approximately. He had a Little League baseball game one day. My husband's brother and sister-in-law, my nephew's parents, were unable to drive him. They had other stuff to do. I don't remember what the stuff was. I drove him to and from the game. I was about 7 months pregnant with my daughter at the time. My daughter is 5 now, so that tells you how long ago this was. Before the game, my nephew rubbed my tummy for good luck. I asked him to do that because he has a very gentle touch, and we are a very affectionate family. During the game, I took pictures of my handsome little fellow with the plan to post them on Facebook and tag my husband's brother and sister-in-law. I was familiar with that area. It was right near the place where I went to middle school. Sometimes block parties are held around that area, and my husband and I often go to these block parties. There was a special section for disabled people to sit. This section had particularly comfortable seating. The seats had backs, so you won't be all hunched over and uncomfortable like you would be if you were in the bleachers. Also, it was close to the bathroom. Luckily for me, pregnancy counted as a condition that allowed you to sit in that area. I did not see much of the game because I had to get up to pee like 8 times during it. However, the parts that I did see made for a really great Facebook post. There was a building that you could enter with a bathroom. I had already entered that building several times to relieve myself. This one time I entered that building, and all of the stalls in the ladies' room were occupied. Therefore, I decided to use one of the porta-potties. There were 2 porta-potties, one about 10 feet from the bleachers, and one next to the track about 100 yards from the baseball field. The temperature that day was in the low to mid-60s Fahrenheit, and it was slightly humid, That would be comfortable weather in which to be outside if I weren't pregnant. However, when I am carrying around a big belly and I have rashes on my thighs, I do not want to make the trip to the potty near the track. As I was walking to the potty near the bleachers, my baby bump out in front of me. I pressed my thighs together to keep from wetting my pants, crossed my fingers and whispered to myself, "Please don't be occupied." When I got to the potty and opened it to see that it was empty, I breathed a sigh of relief. I entered the porta-potty, closed and locked the door, unbuttoned and pulled down my maternity pants, sat on the toilet and peed. At one point, my phone buzzes, so I reach into my purse to grab it. I brought my purse with me because I do not trust anyone. I realize I am receiving a phone call from my friend. I answer the phone, and my friend and I talk for about 15 minutes, then we hang up. I wipe myself, stand up, use hand sanitizer, apply some ointment to my burning thighs, and zip up my pants in that order. That is when I realize that there should be way more noise considering how close the potty is to the bleachers. It is weird how long it has been without anyone knocking on the door. Something is off. I exit the porta-potty. I now realize that I am at the track, and I just stepped out of that other porta-potty. Not the one I stepped into. Not only am I confused and weirded out, I am dreading the trip back to the baseball area. I head back to the baseball field. It looks like the game just ended. My nephew is standing outside the building with the indoor bathroom. Out of breath from waddling over there, I call his name and wave him down. I ask him what he was doing there. He said that he assumed I was in the bathroom and he was waiting for me. He then says to me, "Where were you?" I inform him that all the stalls in the ladies' room were occupied. Since I did not feel like explaining this glitch in the Matrix phenomenon that just happened to me, I tell him that I went to the other porta-potty, since the one by the bleachers was also occupied. I then drove my nephew home. Because this was like 5 years ago and I was experiencing pregnancy brain, it is possible that I am remembering this event slightly differently from the way that it actually happened. Come to think of it, I do not know if I actually sat there for 15 minutes and talked on the phone. Maybe I actually stood up, applied ointment and left the porta-potty all while talking on the phone. It is also possible that I am overestimating how long I was actually on the phone. Also, I'm seeing a lot of people ask why I'm including so many unnecessary details. I want to include all these details so that you all can empathize with me. I also feel most people would not remember this event the way that I did, pay attention in the same way that I did, or feel the way I did. However, I'm not most people. I am a weirdo. 6. This happened the night before last, and I can't stop thinking about it. I went to bed around 11:30 p.m. Before bed, I always read. I have a warm yellow low-light lamp beside my bed that's directed down toward my book. I was reading a non-fiction history book until midnight. Red Horizons, the true story of Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu's crimes, lifestyle and corruption, by former head of Romanian intelligence, Lieutenant General Ion Mihai Pacepa. Just to rule out that I wasn't making my imagination go wild by something I read. I put my book, along with my phone and camera facing down on top, on the nightstand next to me and turned out the light. My bedroom walls are painted deep, dark purple and my furniture is black. I have a thick blackout curtain over the single window in my bedroom, which faces towards the neighbor's house in a quiet, small, gated community. When I turned the light out, my bedroom is pitch black. It wasn't more than 2 minutes after I turned the light out. I was just getting comfortable. As I was rolling onto my back to turn onto my other side, my eyes were open, and I saw this brilliant bright flash of white light, very similar to a concentrated ball of light from a camera flash and just as quick, at the end of my bed. It lit up the bottom portion of my room. I felt my pupils contract when I saw the afterglow of it, and verbally said, "What the F was that?" Unfortunately, to no witnesses, I was paralyzed with fear for at least a minute, waiting to see if it would happen again, and I could pinpoint it. I finally reached up and turned my bedside light back on and looked around to investigate the source. But there's no electronics in that area. I have no television, no other lamps, nothing plugged into that part of my room that would give a source for a spark. There was no sound or smell. I thought at first the fire alarm, but the alarm has no strobe, is high up on the ceiling, and only beeps. So I looked at the weather to rule out lightning, even though I have a thick black curtain over my window. But there had not been a storm. I looked at my phone, the flash side downright on the book on the nightstand. Then the paranoia started, thinking maybe someone was up in my attic taking pictures from the vent, even though the flash of light was lower to the floor, maybe in the closet. I just couldn't rationalize it, so I started thinking it was in my head. I was shook. I laid awake for another hour scrolling through my phone and just trying to settle back down until I could fall asleep. The next morning, I googled unexplained flash of bright white light in a dark room, and was astonished to find that I wasn't alone. Apparently, this is some unexplained phenomena experienced by multiple people, posted across all types of forums with all types of theories throughout many years. I was so unsettled that I made an eye exam appointment that morning and was able to get in late in the afternoon. I haven't had my eyes checked for the 8 years since my LASIK surgery, and wanted to rule out retinal detachment or any other issues. My exam came back 20/20 vision, healthy and normal. The doctor seemed to be baffled by the fact that I felt the physical painful flash and after image, and said it was possibly aura from a migraine, but I have never suffered from migraines. I didn't have a headache or even felt ill that night. Those that do have aura migraines, what are these auras like? Do they appear to be external even though you know they're caused by a migraine? And are you aware the aura is from the migraine, or does it come out of nowhere and startle you? I'm a skeptic, non-religious, non-spiritual, so I personally believe it's some strange unidentified luminescent phenomena that can be explained by physics, as I feel certain it was external. 7. So this is a random thing that occasionally happens in our kitchen, and kitchen only. I have ADHD and OCD, and am very particular when it comes to the kitchen and how it is organized. When we bought our house, we agreed I would dictate what happened in the kitchen, and he could do what he wanted in the backyard. The rest of the house had a mutual agreement clause. Anyway, I cook a lot. It's literally one of the few hyperfixation hobbies I started that ever really stuck. There's a few others in rotation, but I digress. I have this weird thing with brands and only buy OXO equipment. That being said, I have a variety of whisks and other utensils. I have a mini whisk that I love, that I use for small dishes. Eggs, broths, coffee, weird, I know. Again, it's a weird ADHD OCD thing. My husband cooks breakfast for himself, often, as I am often out of the house by the time he rises. I will wash the dishes and put them away if time permits. Another fun OCD tick. We both use this tiny whisk daily for multiple things and are very sure we put it back when we're done. We had a few busy weeks and were out on weekends going to brunch, soccer games, basketball games, various events, mostly kid-centric. The weekend slowed down, and we went back to a more house-central timeline. So Saturday morning we get up and start prepping for breakfast and cannot for the life of me find the damn whisk. Weeks go by. I deep clean and reorganize the kitchen, trying in vain to find the whisk. No luck. This has happened with a few other things, but nothing as pressing as the stupid mini whisk we use all the time. Large ice cube tray gone, one single small spoon out of a set of 24, etc. Anyhow, I conceded to the loss of this stupid little whisk and braved Target to buy a new one. I got the new one home, washed it, and put it in the drawer. Hours later, I am in the kitchen, having a casual convo with my husband while we prep dinner. I go to the drawer with the whisks, and lo and behold, there are 2 of the same whisks. One obviously new, and one with a bit of wear and discoloration from washing in the dishwasher. Cue both of us staring in shock at one another. What the hell? How the hell? The drawer has 6 whisks and 3 sets of tongs. There is no way the damn thing could have been overlooked. The drawer swallowed it, hung onto it, and spit it back out when we moved on and bought a new one. Still missing the ice cube tray, but we have a full set of 24 little spoons, except the one that disappeared came back in the form of a soup spoon, wider and deeper. I can only explain this as a weird glitch in the Matrix, or possibly a wormhole. I'm baffled, and so is my husband. Anyway, thanks for listening to my glitch story. It feels good to get it out of my mind. Oh yeah, the old whisk broke at the handle about a week after it came back. Oh. I'll never know, and is going to drive me crazy. I guess that thought will be a new hyperfixation that joins the rotation. 8. So a little background. My mum grew up in a small town and is still extremely close with many of her childhood friends, one of whose changed name is Liz. My family lives in the capital city, and the town she grew up in is about a 4 or 5 hour drive away. But my parents visit there multiple times a year, so keeping in contact is easy. Liz was married to a man, John. John was a big, tall man, and one of my favorite uncles growing up. At some point, they moved from the small town about 40 minutes away into the countryside, and set up their farm and had a child. About 5 or 6 years ago, John very suddenly passed away, leaving Liz and everybody else devastated. Trigger warning on how he died. John was home alone, and he was doing his morning farm tasks when he had a stroke, whilst outside in the freezing snowy cold. This was very early in the morning, and neither his wife or daughter would be home for another 6 or 8 hours. So he lay there, outside unconscious, until his wife finally returned home to find him dead. This next part I remember very, very well. I was at home, and was helping my mum make dinner when Liz called to tell her of her husband's passing, and when my mum hung up the phone she burst into tears and broke the news to the rest of my family. We all took it pretty hard. I was 19 or 20 and did not live at home at the time, so admittedly the next few days were a bit of a blur, as I was not home constantly. I did not attend the funeral myself, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I will say, in itself, that is not strange for my family, and how we usually do things. My siblings and I did not even go to my father's brother's funeral last year. That, and it probably being a few-day affair, I would not have been able to get enough time off to do so. I vaguely remember my parents making the trip, and for some reason, I remember my mum stressing over what she would wear to the funeral. Over the following years, I remember his death being brought up quite a few times, and Liz either alone or with her daughter, coming to the capital to visit us and other friends. She usually stayed in our guest bedroom. Every time I thought about John and his death, and how devastated she and they must still be, as his death was 100% a matter of fact. Cut to last summer. I was living at home for a couple of months, when my mum texts me, Liz is on her way to town, and they will be staying with us. I won't be home for a couple of hours. Can you prep the guest bedroom just in case I won't make it in time? To which I responded, yeah, of course, and proceeded to make the bed, and as I assumed it was her daughter, I also put the extra mattress for her on the other side of the room, as we usually did. 1 single duvet for the bed, 1 single duvet for the mattress, and 2 sets of guest towels on the dresser, again as we usually did for them. My mum comes home, and I go off to the store to get some things for the barbecue my mother decided we were going to have for them. When I pull up to our driveway, I can see her car, so as I walk through the door I call out, "Hey Liz! Hey Tina!" As I lay the bags down to take my shoes off I hear, "Oh wow, apparently I don't deserve a hello," said in a joking voice. A voice familiar, but I still had no idea who it was, so I walked a little further in to see the man, standing with his arms open for embrace in the kitchen. Tina rushed to hug me, and Liz was in the bathroom. I'm standing there, very, very confused by this man and who he was, when it kinda hit me. That's John. Followed immediately by, no, of course that's not John, this must be some relative or something that has come for a visit. So I hugged him and said something like, "Oh, of course you do. I just thought you might prefer the hug," and hugged this familiar stranger, planning to sneakily ask my mum to remind me of who he was. Liz came out of the bathroom, gave me a hug, and walked right past the man and sat down next to my mum at the kitchen table. I motioned for my mum to help me with the alcohol I had left in the car. When outside I whispered to her, "Who's that man in the kitchen again?" To which she looked at me like I was a crazy person and said, "What do you mean? That's John. He's just lost a bit of weight." I realized my initial thought was correct, and that it was in fact a skinnier John. I was at a loss for words, and my mum just stared at me in my surely pale look like I've just seen a ghost face, and asked if everything was all right, and all I could say was, "John is dead." She laughed and asked, "What the hell are you talking about? Of course he's not dead. What do you mean?" I explained everything, and how I swear we have talked about his death multiple times since it happened, how it happened, the phone call from Liz when we were making dinner, and even that when she said they in the text, I assumed it was only Liz and Tina, and therefore made the guest bedroom ready for only the two of them. My mum looked extremely confused, but told me what really happened. He did have a stroke, and was lying unconscious outside, and neither Liz nor Tina would have been home for hours if Liz had not forgot something at the house, and had to drive back to get it, arriving just minutes after John had fallen unconscious. She was able to call emergency services and get John into the car. He was a big man. It must have taken incredible strength, and drive towards the ambulance. This ultimately saved his life. He would not have survived if she had not forgotten her keys. He has apparently come over many times with Liz and Tina and stayed at our house in the last few years. Me and my mom brushed this off as a huge misunderstanding, which it probably is. But I still feel weird with the whole situation, as the fact that he died and the sorrow following his death still feels so true. What do you guys think? A glitch, alternate reality, me being crazy, or just a misunderstanding? 9. This happened a couple of weeks ago and I still can't figure it out. Before I even get started, 1, I drive a lot for work. Like I go through 2 11 to 15 hour audiobooks a month and spend hours on Marco Polo sending and receiving vids from my childhood best friend in another province. 2, I often go on autopilot when driving. I will get home but not remember the drive, etc. The audiobooks help with this. I don't get lost in thought and maintain awareness while on the road. If I lose my place in the book, I know I have zoned out. 3. Even when on autopilot, I drive safety. I don't run red lights or miss stop signs. I don't get in car accidents. I am a cautious driver by nature. Hellfreezer's note: forgetting things like the journey home is actually quite common. It's happened to myself a few times. It's because you make the journey so often. And if nothing eventful happens to make that particular journey stand out from any other, it's almost like your brain's saving space. One evening in question, I was alert, aware of my surroundings and listening to an audiobook. There are 2 4-way stops on a dimly lit road on my way home, and then my street is on the left. I stopped at the first intersection and then the second. The first stop had no other cars. The second had a car already at the intersection, so they went first and then me. I began looking for my turn. It was dark, and I don't often drive at night, so I was actively engaged in ensuring I turned onto my street and not someone's driveway. Except my turn wasn't where it should have been. My internal clock told me I should have reached my street by now. Then I saw a street up ahead and figured I must be driving slower than usual in the dark. I checked my speed. Nope, exactly speed limit. But the turnoff wasn't my street. It had a name, one I didn't recognize. Confused, I kept going and saw another street I didn't recognize. Now, I was completely disoriented. My street is the only street after that second stop sign and before a busy 4-lane intersection with a traffic light. I pulled over and checked my phone's map. Yes, somehow I was on the other side of that road in a subdivision I have never visited. Somehow I skipped location. I told my husband and friends, and they all figure it was highway hypnosis. But it wasn't. I get that all the time. This was different. A, I was actively engaged and watching for my road since it was dark. B, there were no other stop signs between that busy road and where I pulled over. So I wasn't just disoriented, or on the wrong road to begin with. Besides which, I remember the names of the streets at the 4-way stop intersections, and they were correct. C, I was also listening to my audiobook. Looking for a turn I do umpteen times a week doesn't take too much brain power that I have to pause my book, even if it is a lot darker than I'm used to, and it remained coherent throughout so I didn't miss anything. D, when I do zone out, I always take familiar routes. I'll find myself heading to my kids' school or home. I have never zoned out and ended up somewhere unfamiliar. What this felt like to experience was as if the chunk of road with my street and the busy intersection just got cut out. I have no explanation. 10. This happened a few years ago, and has become so infamous in my husband and I's relationship because it legitimately freaks my husband out to the point where we can't even talk about it, besides referring to it as the ring. One Saturday morning, I was finishing up getting ready for work, and went to go put my everyday jewelry on, wedding ring, college class ring, watch, when I realized my college ring was missing from its usual home on my nightstand. This is a very special and sentimental item to me. I was a little panicked when I couldn't find it after a few minutes. I called my husband in to help me look for it, and we proceeded to turn the house upside down for it. He double-checked everywhere I looked, and we scoured both our bedroom and the rest of the house for it. To no avail. I was starting to run out of time to make it to work, so I had to leave without finding it. I returned home after my 8-hour shift, proceeded to drop my bag at the door, and headed straight to the bedroom to change clothes. The second I walked in the bedroom, I saw my ring. It was sitting right on my nightstand, in perfect plain view. I got so excited and assumed my husband had found it for me while I was gone and had placed it there. I figured he was trying to surprise me with it, since he didn't text me to let me know he found it. So I sat on the bed and waited for him to walk in the room so I could thank him. As soon as he walked in the room, I excitedly exclaimed, "You found it!" He stared at me with a confused look and said, "What are you talking about?" I pointed to the ring, still on my nightstand, and said, "My ring, you found it. Where was it?" He got an even more confused look on his face and said, "I didn't find it. Where did you find it?" I started rolling my eyes at this point, thinking he was messing with me, and said something like, "Oh, come on, where was it?" We went back and forth for a while over who found the ring, until I realized my husband actually wasn't kidding at all. He was genuinely confused and thought I was messing with him. His face became more and more serious, and we both stared at each other, understanding that neither of us had actually found it. My husband, a man of science, began going over every possibility of how I could have found it when I got home, placed it on my nightstand, and then forgot I did all of that. I explained to him I had left the house without either of us finding it, literally hadn't been home all day, and had just returned, less than 15 minutes ago, where I hadn't done anything except drop my bag and walk into the bedroom, where it was sitting there waiting for me. To this day, we don't have a single possible explanation for it. He refuses to believe anything other than the idea that I somehow found it, and then immediately forgot I did that, which is absolutely impossible. How could I completely forget both finding it and placing it on my nightstand? There's no way. But he refuses to believe in ghosts or anything not with a rational explanation, and I don't have a single other logical possibility for his return. It's been years, and we still can't talk about it without getting completely spooked about the whole thing. And while I don't have a rational explanation, I do have a wishful thinking one. My grandpa, my hero, had passed away a month before. Was he looking out for me? I'll never know. 11. Something pretty odd happened to me in an elevator of all places, and I'd like to ask your opinion on it. As a disclaimer, I'm the type of person who'd rather ignore anything that seems out of the ordinary and go on about their life, and I try to be as rational as possible. However, I keep thinking about this situation. Maybe I interpreted the whole situation wrong. I don't know. I'll let you guys form your own opinion. Yesterday I had to pick up a paper for an exam from the university where it's also hosted. I'm not a student there, so I'm not very familiar with the place, and the last time I went there was last year for a similar exam. Anyway, this is just to give you a little more context. The story goes like this. The university is extremely crowded, since it's noon. I take the elevator to the 3rd floor, go pick up the paper from one of their offices, then go back to the elevators. I get into the elevator with these 2 girls. I stand right next to the buttons. This is my fault too, because I hesitated to press my floor, but I wasn't sure if the one button was the one for the ground floor or the 1st floor. Anyway, the 2 girls talk for a bit before pressing the one button. First floor, not ground floor as I figured later, which was the P button, and going silent. Everything is normal so far. We get to the first floor. I step out a bit to check if it's the floor I came from. Obviously it's not. I get back in. The girls weirdly don't get off at the floor and don't say anything either about it. Okay. Maybe they changed their minds about it and didn't mention it to each other. Whatever. 2 or 3 people, I can't remember the exact number, but it was more than one person, get on with us from the first floor. We'll call them the second group for clarity, 'cause it's about to get even more complicated. The second group pressed the buttons for the 3rd floor and the 5th floor. Still normal. Now it gets even weirder, and I honestly really don't understand why I had no reaction and made no move to say anything. By the way, everyone was quiet. Nobody communicated anything to each other, which I really don't get, since everyone who got in the elevator was accompanied by at least one other person. Anyway, we go back to the damn 3rd floor. On that floor, the 2 girls get off. The floor that they were previously on, with me. Again, maybe they both realized they needed to get back to the 3rd floor. But somehow didn't mention it to each other, and neither made an attempt to press the 3rd floor button. Anyway, the second group, the one who pressed the button for the 3rd floor, doesn't get off at the 3rd floor. Instead, another group of 3 people with coffee cups step in. And I'm not messing with you. One of the people with the coffee cups calmly presses the button for the 3rd floor. Finally, another person in the elevator pressed a button for the ground floor, and I honestly was worried that the elevator would stay stuck on the 3rd floor. But then I felt it going down, and I was extremely relieved as we reached the ground floor and I stepped out. Funnily enough, I looked back to see if anyone else got off at the ground floor. Nope, no one. Even if there was one person who pressed the button. I leave the university and focus on finding the bus station, forgetting the whole thing. I get back home and start thinking about it more in depth. What the hell? Also, why the hell? It's not like anything supernatural or scary happened, besides the weirdly subdued frustration I was feeling because I was unable to leave this damn building already. It just made no sense. It wasn't as if there was one odd person who was acting weird. It wasn't as if anyone signaled that they pressed the wrong button. Everyone involved in the situation, which, need I remind you, were like 7 or 8 people, behaved illogically. And I don't understand why. It was as if they were mimicking having a destination, when everyone was actually circling back to the 3rd floor. It didn't help that it was silent. No one was communicating anything to anyone like, "Oh, I forgot my bag on the 3rd floor," or anything like that. And I also felt this strange sense of calm mixed with some uneasiness and a sensation I can't describe, as if I didn't belong in this situation or place. I honestly think I was, 1, being pranked, or just people were playing some kind of game. 2, I'm crazy and understood the whole situation in a profoundly wrong way. 3, the students at this university are extremely indecisive and also don't know how an elevator works. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions or there is a part that didn't make sense, let me know. I know that I'm probably making a bigger deal out of it than I should. It was just an interesting situation. My life is very mundane in general. 12. Not sure how to classify this, but it's definitely one of the weirdest sense of experiences I've had. Largely because my family experiences it as well. The first time it happened, or we noticed it happening, was about a year ago. My boyfriend and I were home alone. My family was supposed to be out for the next few hours, so we were just beginning intimate activities when we heard them return. The door opening, loudly as always, and the muffled voices of my mom and brother. We leapt up and scrambled to throw on our clothes. Super confused as to why they were home 4 hours early. A few minutes later, we headed downstairs. It was quiet. The noises had stopped. I don't know when, and I realized no one had returned. It was just silence. My partner and I were both properly freaked out. We had both very clearly heard them get home, heard them talking, the door open and shut. I told my mom about it the next day. About a month later, I was out for a walk. When I came back, my mom was a bit freaked out. She asked if I had come back and knocked at some point. No. Apparently she'd heard heavy banging on the door, loud enough that she'd heard it from upstairs, and came down to let me in, only for no one to be there. Keep in mind, we have a Ring doorbell. Anyone at the door, or any loud noises, would have been picked up, which they were not. There were also multiple instances of hearing knocking, to varying degrees of intensity, only for no one to be there. Those would be easier to write off as maybe potential paranoia, but in many cases my dog reacted as well and started barking, which he never does except when someone is at the door. The latest noticeable incident was about a week ago. I was home alone doing schoolwork when I heard the doorknob shaking like it was being unlocked. Our door has been partially broken the last few years and needs a lot of force to open. Oh, my mom's home early, but the shaking didn't stop. I snuck to the door and looked through the peephole, no one there, but I could still hear it shaking. It was strong and clear enough someone had to be there. I worried someone might be trying to break in despite the Ring doorbell's presence, maybe crouching out of sight of the peephole. I grabbed my phone, keypad ready to dial 911 if needed, and crept to the window in a side room where the front door was visible. No one. A few seconds later it stopped. My family and I own our house. We've been here for the last 16 years. My mother is a single mom who only just returned to work this year, and I've been in online school the last few years and stay almost entirely at home due to medical issues. We know our house and how it sounds. Everyone I tell these stories frustratingly tells me it's just the wind or the house settling, but it's not. It just isn't. It's very clearly the sounds of a person or people. We know our own house sounds, and this isn't that. It doesn't feel malicious or upsetting necessarily, even though it freaks us out. I don't think it's a ghost or something either. My mom certainly doesn't, but it's weird enough that even she acknowledges this strangeness. It feels more like a time replay, if that makes any sense. Certainly Matrix glitchy in nature, I'm not sure. It's hard to tell it's not real until you open the door to no one or come downstairs to an empty house. 13. Many years ago, I was visiting my friends in another country, Denmark, because they were getting married. I was joined by my mother and her partner. I had to buy a dress for the occasion, so a few days before the wedding, the three of us went shopping on Stroll in Copenhagen. I was really optimistic about finding a dress, but it turned out that most of the shops only had stuff that I didn't like. The colors that were in fashion that summer were rather dull in my opinion. It started to rain a lot, and we had been walking around for hours, but I finally noticed a store that I had always liked a lot. It's a chain, and me and my mom went in there, while her partner smoked a cigarette under a little vestibule outside the store. It barely shielded him from the rain, but he was happy to be able to finally have a smoke while we looked around inside. He smoked a lot. I will never forget what we saw inside. The store was full of people, but also the clothes were beautiful. They were almost exclusively in colors that I like. Lots of purple dresses in all shapes and sizes, and skirts that had patterns from gold, purple, and whatnot. I said to my mom that this was definitely what I needed, and I would be buying lots of things, not just one dress, and she agreed. Even though this shop was mostly for younger women, she saw things that she wanted. We both had wet hair and clothes from the rain, so we decided to come back again the day after and go straight to this store, because we didn't want to be trying stuff on while wet, and we wanted to have lots of time and not leave her partner standing outside for long. Also, this store, unlike the others we had been to that day, was full of people. It was on 2 floors, and we could only see the stairs leading to the top floor and glimpsed a tiny bit of what was up there, but judging from what was downstairs, we were sure it would be just as great. So we left, went straight home, and I was giddy with excitement about the next day. I don't like buying clothes for myself, but this is the only time I have ever been giddy about clothes shopping. Now on to the next day. We go straight to this store. It was a bit of a walk from the bus stop, but right away I noticed something was off. It had the same sign outside, so it was definitely the same place. A drugstore I had visited before going in there was still across the street, but there were some things that didn't look the same. I shook off the feeling and went in, really excited as was my mom, but inside the store there was nothing but the same dull stuff that was in every other shop that year. Boring colors, etc. And it looked completely different in every way. I remember my mom's disappointment. She ran up to the woman working there and asked if they had changed everything overnight. She was like, "No, we only bring in new stuff once a week." There was no second floor either. Literally nothing looked the same inside. We had to face the facts that we weren't going to be seeing any of those beautiful clothes again. One other thing we noticed after coming back out was that the vestibule that my mom's partner has stood under while smoking in the rain wasn't there anymore. I have often wondered about this, and me and my mom used to talk about it a lot. And she was sad about it for years. She's really into clothes. It's probably the only time me and her bonded over clothes. And I wonder what would have happened if we had bought anything there. And is stuff like this possibly happening more than we think? I've only ever heard one similar story, where a guy working in Iran went to a really nice diner in a mountain village that was on the second floor over a gas station. Everyone he worked with said he was making it up because it made no sense that a fancy diner would be operating in such a remote place, but he took them there one day, really excited to show them that he was right. And then, when they get to this particular village, which looked the same as most others in the area, everything looks just as he remembers. The same gas station is there, but there's no second floor. He remembered it being the best dinner he had ever had, and so cheap that he couldn't believe it. I can still vividly remember the interior of the store, and the beautiful clothes I saw that day. I would describe them as dreamy. Another thing that made this store different from all the others was that it was full of people. There are lots of clothing stores in Stroll, but none of them had been particularly busy that day. Far from it, even. Then why would this one have been so crowded and full? Anyway, this is one of the strangest things that has happened to me. I was making a list of stuff like this while watching the TV show Dark with my husband. He thinks strange stuff is always happening to me, but he agreed that this was probably the strangest. The fact that my mother experienced it too, and her partner, who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, makes it impossible to deny. 14. This incident happened to me and my friend in college, so a little backstory. For entering the college, we'd need an ID card. We can also load money onto the ID card and swipe it to mark our attendance and to purchase food from the canteen as well. So in the break time where we can chill and eat, my friend, being my friend, took my card as he didn't have his own at the time and went to get something from the canteen. During all of this, the break ended and all of us went to our respective classes. I had a free lecture and went with my other friends to another class which was in the other block to sit and chill. Those classes are meant for students who have a free lecture so they can study or complete their work, etc. So that time I was unaware that the friend also had a free lecture and was looking for me thinking I'm in my class, and went to my original class where he thought I would be to return my ID card. After he went to my class, he got to know that I wasn't there and left my card with the teacher. Meanwhile, something or someone that looked like my friend but wasn't him entered the class and came to me. He looked strange and seemed like he didn't want to talk, or to keep the whole conversation very short. He gave me my ID card and turned back, and as soon as he did, I asked him to sit down and he started saying, "I'll be back in some time," and went away. Also, when he came in the class, he was looking down and looked at the door while entering, like something was there, which was totally opposite of his personality. He's always smiling and is liked by everyone. After all this, after maybe a minute or two, he again came back in as if it was the first time he came. He entered with his usual smile, shook my hand, and told me that he'd been looking for me to return the card, and had dropped it off in class with my teacher, to which I told him that he had just given it to me, which I showed him. We have both spoken over it multiple times. It's not possible that I went to my class and came back before he came to the other block, because there is only one way to walk between those blocks, and it's not possible for anything human to go the other block to get the card and return back and sit in the class, while my friend was coming from my original class to the other block at the same time. Even the teacher didn't tell me anything once I returned to my class after the lecture ended. This friend has been with me since more than 5 years, and I know him in and out, and I just know when he's lying. I remember his face when I told him all of this. I'm sure that whatever he's saying is true, and whenever I think of this, it gives me some kind of weird feeling, as if something that was him but wasn't was present there, for whatever reason. 15. My car drove itself, or something. And no, it wasn't a Tesla or any other car with self-driving capabilities. It's a 2012 Toyota Prius. This happened 3 months ago, and I still haven't been able to come up with a rational explanation other than a glitch. It was a week before my brother's wedding, so I was staying with my parents to help them with preparations. My mom asked me to go pick up her Sephora order from the mall, so I borrowed one of their cars, drove over there, and parked near the entrance closest to the Sephora. For context, this is an indoor mall that I am very familiar with because I grew up in that area. While some of the stores have moved in and out, the general layout has stayed the same, and the Sephora has been in the same spot for as long as I can remember. You go through the side entrance, up the escalator, make a left, and it's the third store on your right. So I go inside, and the first thing I see is a brand new splatter room. I love splatter rooms, so I took a photo and texted it to my cousin's group chat to tell them we should all do that together when they came into town for the wedding. Then I ran up to Sephora, grabbed my mom's order, and ran out to the entrance I came in. I was inside for less than 10 minutes. When I got to where I had parked the car, it wasn't there. There was another car in that spot. I thought for sure I was just misremembering, but it must be in the general area. So I started weaving up and down the parking spaces. After 5-ish minutes, I started pressing the lock button on my keys, but I couldn't hear anything from the car. I was super confused, but still figured I was misremembering. Maybe I parked further away from the entrance, but hadn't realized it. So I walked all the way down that row of parking spaces until I got to the actual road, carefully looking at every spot, all the while still pressing the lock button on the keys. Nothing. Then I did the same thing for the parking rows on either side of where I thought I'd parked. This time I was pushing the panic button too, still nothing. I knew the car must have been stolen, and I couldn't believe that this would happen right before my brother's wedding. I called my mom and explained the situation to her. The whole time she was on the phone, I was walking up and down different parking rows looking for the car, hoping to God I just missed it. I knew I had to go inside and ask security if they had camera footage, and then report the car stolen, but also, I'm brown, and have had bad cop experiences before. So I thought that I would walk all the way around the mall just once, and then report the car stolen. I was rapidly pushing the lock and panic buttons, trying to breathe deeply and not freak out. When I got to the other side of the mall, a completely different entrance than the one I had come out of like 40 minutes earlier, that's when I heard the car. It was there, and it was parked, just not where I left it. I wanted so badly to believe that I'd just forgotten where I'd parked the car. I tried telling myself that I was just stressed with wedding preparations, but I had the text that I'd sent to my cousins about the splatter room, with a photograph. 2 of them had replied to it. I know I went in that entrance. If I had parked it on the opposite side, I would have had to walk all the way around the mall to get to that entrance, which was ridiculous. It still creeps me out just thinking about it. 16. About a month ago, my oldest daughter, 19, was driving to Pittsburgh Airport with her best friend to pick up the best friend's boyfriend. They were driving in the best friend's car, an old Jaguar, and I was suffering from major anxiety, to say the least. First of all, they had never driven that far at night before. Second, when going over the mountain, you can run into snow you don't account for. It wasn't calling for snow that evening, however, it is different when you drive toward the mountains, because snow can happen at any moment. Anyway, it was about midnight when I was lying in bed, wondering how the drive was going. I couldn't sleep because my anxiety-ridden mind was conjuring up all these images and scenarios of freak snowstorms and blizzards and all the worst things a parent could possibly imagine. So to get my mind off the negative and make myself feel better, I got out of bed to look out the window, remind myself that I was being crazy, and there was no call for snow that evening. I live in town next to a parking lot. My bedroom is on the second story of my home, overlooking our backyard and the parking lot next door. Our bottom driveway is connected to the adjacent lot, so a lot of time cars will drive in and use our driveway to turn around. Well, it just so happened that a car was pulling in and doing just that as I looked out of the window. I could see snow falling heavily through the cast of light created by the car's headlights. The car lit up our backyard, and I could see the snow plain as day through the car's headlights as it was turning into our driveway. I could make out what looked to be at least 2 or 3 inches of snow already laying on the ground. Not only could I make out this freak blizzard from the car randomly turning around in my driveway, but I could also see it because of the streetlights in the parking lot. I was shocked because less than an hour later there was no snow and the sky was clear. I immediately panicked, went to grab my phone off my dresser, and called my daughter. I told her about the unexpected snowstorm we were getting and asked her if she had run into any snow. She seemed confused and explained that they hadn't run into any snow at all the entire trip. I was relieved and just assumed the snow had come from the opposite direction, and by the time it would reach them, they would be safely in Pittsburgh. I told her to be careful, hung up the phone, and walked back to the window to look outside. By this time, the car had gone, except this time when I looked there was no snow. There weren't 2 or 3 inches on the ground. No snow falling heavily through the beam of lights being cast by the street lamps in the parking lot next door. There was absolutely no snow anywhere, and the sky was once again clear. From the time I got up, I looked out the window, called my daughter, hung up the phone, and returned to the window. Maybe a total of 5 minutes had passed. I was in shock. I'm a logical person. I can usually rationalize things and explain them away. But this is a hard one for me. I know without a shadow of a doubt I saw a full-on blizzard happening. I watched it fall. I saw it accumulating on the ground. I saw it cover our trampoline in the backyard. This has me confused. My rational mind is telling me I just thought I witnessed a snowstorm. I even walked outside to make sure I wasn't going mad. How does a person mistakenly see snow when there is none? Especially if the light being cast gives you a clear view of the ground and air. What did I see falling from the sky? What did I see lying on the ground because it wasn't green grass? How did the sky clear up so fast? Is it possible my mind created a glitch in reality because of my intense fear and panic? Like my thoughts were so strong in that moment, it created the very thing I was fearing the most. And after talking to my daughter and realizing they were safe, the glitch resolved? I don't know. Has this ever happened to anyone else? Nothing like this has ever happened to me. 1 minute I'm watching a full-on blizzard, and the next, I'm not. 17. For context, I'm a dog walker on the west coast of Scotland. It was a rainy, miserable day, sometime in August, and I had about 5 dogs in my van to take on a group walk. And as it was rainy, I decided to take them to the beach, as it would likely be empty on such a bad day. As I turned off onto the quarter-mile track leading down to the beach, I caught up with another car that was driving down there as well. I'll admit I was a bit peeved because I was hoping to get the beach to myself. But there are 2 bays, separated by a load of rocks you cannot cross easily, with 2 separate paths leading down to them from the car park of this particular beach. So I figured I'd let these guys park up and see which way they wanted to go, and I would go on to the other bay. As I followed the car into an otherwise empty car park, I immediately pulled into the first space on the right, whilst the car I was following appeared to carry on driving right to the end of the car park, about 30 to 40 yards long. It's a small car park, more of a field, but whatever. I turned my engine off and looked out of my passenger side window, and the car was still driving along. I gave it a minute and leaned over to look out the window again, and the car was just inching forwards, as if it was finally about to stop. I waited a bit longer, expecting to hear the sound of car doors opening and shutting, but didn't hear anything. So I leaned forwards and looked again, and the car was still inching forwards as though it was just about to stop. It had seemed to be just about to stop forever at this point, but it didn't strike me as odd. I was just getting impatient waiting for them to get out and pick a beach and leave me to myself. At this point the dog started to whine, presumably a bit confused as to why I had just parked up and sat there and not let them out. So I decided to get out and open the back doors of the van to placate them. They're crated so they wouldn't be able to jump out. So I got out and walked round the back of my van, glanced over to the car that was still just slowly pulling into its car parking space. At this point, I'm still not thinking anything is off. I just thought this was the slowest driver in the world, and I'm getting a bit impatient, and I just want to get on as I have a busy day. After glancing at the car, I opened my back doors, roughly would have taken 0.5 to 1 seconds, and looked back at the car again, and it's vanished. There's no sign of it. There is no way out at the other end of the car park. The only way out was the way we had both came in, which would have required the car to turn around and drive past me. And I know this wasn't possible because 1, there simply wasn't enough time for it to have turned around and drove past in the half to 1 second. 2, I would definitely have heard it do so, as it would have been driving along the track about 1 meter behind me. 3, I would have seen it driving back up the quarter-mile track that we'd just driven down, and I looked back up there and there were no vehicles. I know this story is a bit boring, and it's hard to convey just how impossible this actually is, without you fully understanding the layout of the beach car park. But believe me, this is just impossible. Does anyone have any idea of what happened? The closest thing I can come up with is a time slip. However, people usually report feeling strange, losing time and also going back significantly in time, whereas I felt nothing but irritation at how long the car was taking to park. Though in retrospect, the fact that I glanced at it several times over the course of about 2 minutes, and it was always just pulling into its spot, every time is a bit strange. And the car was pretty modern. It was a Ford Mondeo estate car with a roof box on it. I didn't make note of the year, but definitely under 10 years old. On a positive note, I got the beach to myself, though. Any ideas? 18. A month ago, I bought a new jacket to wear for the cold winter weather, and also because I live in the Pacific Northwest, something that would be okay to wear in the rain. I decided on a black Calvin Klein jacket that was all black, had 2 pockets in the usual hand spots and a CK logo on the left arm, and the zipper was on the left side of the jacket instead of the right side. I know that for a fact because every time I would zip up my jacket to go to work, I think about how much I dislike the zipper being on the left and not the right. I know that's usually on women's jackets, but look at the comments. Someone found the exact jacket I bought originally, and it is men's. I wore the jacket every day while at work, and I never took it off while at work. It's too cold these days, and I go outside of my work building multiple times a day. None of my co-workers have a Calvin Klein jacket, and they even poked fun at me for it when they saw the brand. So it's established that I never take my jacket off at work, and none of my co-workers have a Calvin Klein jacket. Keep these 2 things in mind. Tonight, I decided to wash the jacket with some other black clothes of mine. I had to remove the things that are always in my pockets at work before I could wash the jacket, which are 1 pack of gum, a pen that is from a unique pen set that only I own at work, and a small travel-size bottle of cologne that I spray myself with every few hours. So now I've established that I didn't mistakenly take a co-worker's jacket because my daily carry items were in the left pocket where they always are. And remember, none of my co-workers have a Calvin Klein jacket. I take the clothes out of the dryer and grab the jacket because my wife wants to go out for dinner. I then get thoroughly confused. This isn't my jacket. This imposter jacket that I pulled out the dryer has a bright white stripe going down the jacket right next to the zipper. The zipper is on the right side of the jacket. The CK logo that was on the left arm is now a full Calvin Klein logo, and the inside of the jacket is Sherpa-lined. My jacket was all black with no white stripes. The zipper was on the left side. The arm logo said only CK, and my jacket was not Sherpa-lined. I then have a mini mental breakdown where I question reality. I called my wife's dad just in case he owns a Calvin Klein jacket and mistakenly left it at my house the last time they were over, and he said he does not own a Calvin Klein jacket, and like I stated before, I had removed my personal items from the pockets before placing them in the washing machine. None of my co-workers had a Calvin Klein jacket, and like I stated before, I never take my jacket off at work. I then looked at the website of the store I bought it from, and my jacket apparently doesn't exist. Only this new Sherpa-lined and right-sided zipper jacket is on the website. This is also the only big fancy brand clothing item I own. All my other clothing is cheap stuff from Target or Fred Meyer. So I know I'm not mistaking it for another jacket I own. I bought it about a month ago, and wore it every single day. I am so confused. I explained the situation to my co-workers, and they also think I'm wearing a different jacket. They agree that my original jacket just had a CK on the sleeve and that the zipper was on the left. 19. This happened to me, 22, female, about a month or so ago. I've been thinking about this experience a lot recently, and a friend of mine recommended I share it. This experience has kept me up at night recently, and the more I think about it, the more unexplainable it gets. It was a Saturday, and I enjoy filling up my car on the weekend before the week begins. I needed to get gas, and before I left the house, I told my dad I would be back in a few minutes. I just needed to get gas down the road at my local Kroger, because it's 3 cents off the gallon, and would be back shortly after. Anyways, for some reason, I have an overbearing dad who refuses to believe I know how to pump gas on my own, even though I've been doing it for over 6 years. I leave the house to get gas, and as I mentioned, the Kroger is right down the road. I have to take a massive left turn to get into the area, so I like to drive all the way around to avoid that massive turn, aka making a 2-minute drive into a 7-minute drive. As I'm making the drive about 3 or 4 minutes in, I notice my parents' car approach me, and begin driving close behind me in my rearview mirror. Their car is unique, as the color is a specific light grayish-blue. I roll my eyes as I'm thinking, wow, they seriously think I can't get gas on my own and are following me to make sure I can. I approach a stop sign and quickly check my side view mirror to get a closer look to make sure it's them, obviously annoyed. In my mirror I see it's my parents driving. I know so intensely that it was my parents, like I know what my parents look like. There's something off, I notice, though. Their expressions are completely blank and just seem empty? I can't explain it, but it had to be my parents. But like all energy from them was gone, they looked like NPCs. I decide to shrug it off and keep driving just the last stretch to the Kroger. As I turn into the Kroger, I notice my parents are no longer behind me. I pull up to a pump and pull out my phone to check my parents' location. They are at home. There was no way they had enough time to make it back home from where I had last seen them on the road. I finished pumping gas and make my way back home, still very confused by the encounter. Later that night, I ask in a laughing manner to my mom, "Hey, Mom, were you and Dad following me earlier?" She looks at me, super confused, and says, "What are you talking about?" I explain what I saw on my way to get gas, and she replies with, "Dad and I haven't left the house today." I must preface this by saying my parents are incredibly religious, conservative, straightforward people, and would not prank me like this. I know with absolute certainty that they did not leave the house. So, please tell me who was following me. 20. My husband and I experienced what we think could only be explained by a glitch in the Matrix at SeaWorld Orlando on Saturday night, the 30th November 2024, around 8 p.m. EST, that has both of us questioning our reality. For context, in case you're unfamiliar with the locker system at SeaWorld, the park has lockers you can rent to store your belongings while on various rides, and you create a 4-digit code to open your assigned locker number that is printed on your receipt, so that only you should be able to reopen the locker assigned to you once you're done riding. It's worth noting these lockers are not otherwise accessible by park guests or employees, since they remain locked even when unassigned, and can only be opened from the front using your code until the rental expires. Also, if you rent a transferable locker pass for the entire day like we did, you can press a button to end the rental on the locker you just finished using, so you can transfer your rental to another locker for the next ride. After riding many rides throughout the day, using different lockers, and ending the night with one of our favorite rides called Pipeline, we gathered all our belongings from the locker, at least we thought, before exiting the park and walking halfway through the parking lot, when my husband suddenly realized he didn't have his phone with him. Even though we had been diligent about not leaving anything behind in lockers all day, we thought since it was dark and we were tired, it must have accidentally been left in the locker we last used. So we ran back to the park entrance and returned to Pipeline as fast as we could. Here's where reality seemed to glitch. We opened the locker, but to our dismay and slight panic, it was empty. We both swept our hands all around the inside of the locker and didn't feel anything, so I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the inside of the black metal locker entirely. but could see nothing except for the same white sticker that in each locker was fully visible. We shut the locker door, and I immediately called his phone, although it was on vibrate in case it was in his backpack or pockets, without us realizing, but he felt nothing and we heard nothing vibrating from inside the locker, even though it seemed clear after our first check that it wasn't inside. We opened the locker a second time, and did the same checks as before, sweeping our hands, shining my flashlight, calling his phone, just to make sure we weren't somehow mistaken the first time. But it was still empty. We briefly discussed going to look for his phone in the locker for the ride we did right before Pipeline, which was a ride called Kraken that was practically on the other side of the park. When it occurred to my husband, he had already ended the locker rental at Kraken, and the only way we could reopen it without help from park security would be to randomly be reassigned the same locker number as before. We were still standing in front of our locker at Pipeline when my increasingly panicked husband decided to open it for a third time, despite us logically knowing there was no way his phone could be inside. But to both of our disbelief, there it was. His phone was laying face down and sideways at the front of the locker, almost directly in front of the white sticker that was now mostly covered by his phone. Yet the sticker had been fully visible before both times that we checked with my flashlight, and we had both physically felt and seen every square inch inside of the locker the first 2 times we checked. We left the park feeling perplexed, and I would really love to know what others think. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Glitch... Can I even call this monthly anymore? I don't think so. Well, let's just say Glitch Monthly 27. I might have to change the title to Glitch Mega or something like that. We shall see. But here we are, and I hope you enjoy this collection of stories. And thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already chosen to do so. And a little bit of support on my Patreon page is not required, but it is very, very much appreciated and does help. Okay, and a shout out goes to the author of story number 4. That was the My Story of Gain Time, and that is Scorpion Dan. Thank you very much for letting us use your story, Scorpion Dan. And now let's move on to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And this one comes from Gemwolf on the Discord, and it is, what's the one thing you regret buying or trying? That one's pretty easy for me. I can see it as I'm recording right now. I have this little white 500 watt heater in the corner of my room. I bought it years ago. I used to have it underneath my bed, and the idea was just to keep the under the bed warm, so there'd be no issue of condensation, because the windows used to be, they were old and they weren't so great. They have since been replaced, and that problem is eliminated thanks to that. But it's not a very good heater, and it definitely wouldn't heat a room. I have since purchased another heater for the office for the upstairs, and that one works quite well. And obviously I have my central heating when I need it. Technically, when British Gas get their finger out and I can actually use it properly. Mustn't grumble. But yeah, that little heater was... I can't even remember how much I paid for it, but it really was not worth the money, and I've not gotten much use out of it. Because 4 hours and it hadn't even heated up a room. But as I say, it's only 500 watts, so it's not going to do much. And before we go, let's take a look at the answer of the day from a previous video. And this one came from Glitch Monthly 25, and it was, what component, when added to food, either savory or sweet I believe, makes it better? And today's answer comes from... Kelly Alves. 1. Cheese for the savory. I tend to throw cheese at most things. 2. I'm with you. Caramel is instant happiness. Caramel. Also quite easy to make. Basically, you get a can of sweetened condensed milk, dump it into a saucepot, and cook it at a very low heat until it turns into caramel. Frequent stirring essential. That's certainly one way to do it. I've never tried that method, but I have made caramel. It's been a while since I've done it, though. Thank you very much for your answer, Kelly. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. It's a very busy week for me. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.